University here at the University of Texas, and we're here just to facilitate some conversation with Tim Latimer. Really honored to have this chance. We've been friends for many years, but we've never been on stage quite this way together. So this is kind of a new part of our friendship, which is exciting. And I'll start, maybe Tim, just ask you to give a little bit of your background about how you ended up here as CEO of a geothermal company, because I think your background, your path to get to it's pretty interesting.
Yeah, so as Taylor said, I started my career in oil and gas, like I'm guessing a lot of people in this room, and it's very fitting that we're hosting this at Halliburton's headquarters facility here. So that's great, and just got really enamored by all the technology that unlocked the shale revolution. And as I was early in my career, I became a lot more passionate about climate change and saw this as a great opportunity to move into that. So fast forward 10 years later, and here I am. Can I ask you the same question, actually?
Yeah.
So,
sure.
Dr. Weber, there wasn't as much of a introduction here, so can I maybe brag on you a little bit?
Okay, sure. I'm a little nervous, but okay,
here.
Sure.
So, PhD at Stanford.
That's right.
And you've been a professor at University of Texas for a long time.
That's right.
You've written many books and even turned one into a award-winning PBS documentary.
That's correct.
What was that called?
Power Trip, The Story of Energy. Season 2 is on PBS right now.
Season 2 is airing. You're a presidential leadership scholar.
That's right.
Currently CTO of Energy Impact Partners, one of the most important venture funds in the space, and former CTO of Engie.
That's right.
So one of my friends describes Dr. Weber as a walking encyclopedia of energy. And I think it's true. It doesn't matter what energy source, from where, this guy knows the answer. So like, actually, I know you're supposed to be interviewing me.
That's right. Yeah.
But I warned you I might try to flip it around on you.
Yeah, that's good.
Geothermal CEO, passionate about geothermal, not really that noteworthy, but guy who looks across the entire energy landscape and has the breadth and depth of experience that you do. Why are you here talking about geothermal?
Oh, that's great. So you have flipped this on. Okay, so first of all, thank you for reading my bio, just like my mom wrote it. So that was nice of you. This is kind of funny. So presidential leadership scholars, we'll talk about first. You did this last year as well. So for those of you who don't know, this is a leadership training program set up by President George W. Bush and Bill Clinton. The two of them collaborate. They're very good friends, and they see this shortage of leadership and a shortage of collaboration of bipartisanship. So they set up a leadership training program. And I had the honor and opportunity to do that in 2018 and got to meet with the presidents and their staffs. And you did it last year, essentially, right? So we got a chance to, was it 2021 or 2022?
2022.
Yeah, it was last year. So we got to meet with the presidents and their chiefs of staff and their families and other things for this leadership training, which is a lot of fun. We might come back to that in a minute. The reason why I'm interested in geothermal is because there are a variety of factors we must consider as we move forward as a society. I'm sure these are things that have come up many times today around making energy secure, making it reliable, making it affordable, making it dispatchable, making it clean. And clean especially includes greenhouse gas emissions, but also includes overall land impact and water needs and that kind of thing. And if you look at wind and solar, which are really easy and cheap to build, we've built a lot of wind and solar in Texas, thankfully, or else the grid would have collapsed this summer if we hadn't built what we did. But they have a performance envelope that isn't as convenient when you get to really high fractions because of their variability. Like the wind and solar vary based on meteorological and astronomical conditions. In geothermal, heat from the earth does not vary based on position of the sun or the time of day or time of year the same way. And so the performance profile of geothermal is like a perfect complement in many ways for the other things we're already building. And so when I look forward in the future of decarbonization, it's the kind of performance envelope we need and want. So that's why I'm excited about it. And I think you and I are both active on Twitter, and I don't know how it is for you, but I do my most regrettable things on Twitter usually. But I do say some things that are useful every once in a while. And I've been sort of declaring on Twitter recently that I think we're entering the geothermal decade the way we are in the solar decade now, and we had been in the wind decade. So that's a very long answer, but I think it's funny because I'm supposed to be interviewing you, as you said.
No,
so.
I just wanted to get that out there because it's something that, and sorry to embarrass you by reading off your resume, but it's a big deal, I think, for the geothermal community to have somebody like you who's not a geothermal person, but is somebody who looks across the entire landscape to echo that message. Because we've been telling it to ourselves for a few years now, but it's wonderful to be able to bring people like you in to echo that and bring your credibility to the table about how serious the geothermal decade is.
If you approach it as, so I'm really a systems engineer, if you approach it as a systems problem, geothermal is highly valuable. So Sylvia and others will do this as a subsurface expert. I'm not a subsurface expert, but I look at the above ground performance, and geothermal's got the right profile. The only thing that comes close really might be hydro in some countries, maybe Norway, or small modular reactor, nuclear someday or something like that. So there's only a few that might have similar kind of performance profile, but overall cost profile looks pretty good for geothermal. So I'm pretty excited. So, all right, let's back up now. Let me ask you a question, if that's okay. So you did this leadership training with President Bush and President Clinton. You're now a leader of a company. You're a thought leading company in the space. Are there any leadership lessons you learned from the presidents or the staffs that you think are relevant, either to you at the company or to this kind of nascent sector? I call it nascent, but it's not really a new sector, but kind of a reborn sector.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. So as Michael said, we got to meet with the presidents and their staff and learn from them. And one of the things that was interesting up in Dallas at the President Bush Library, when George Bush was there and he was talking about leadership, one of the things about our space is you're making big decisions in a very complex environment where there's technical inputs and permitting inputs and financing inputs and regulatory inputs. And it was interesting to see how the presidents thought about, or at least this president, President Bush, thought about complex decision making. And one of the things he talked about that I thought was a really fascinating lesson to go forward on is it's actually really good, I think, to set up an adversarial and challenging environment whenever you're trying to make a decision. And the phrase that always stuck with me from his comments there was that, he was talking about if we're going to roll out some new policy proposal, what a terrible thing it would be for them to talk about it forever, run the policy proposal out there, and then get slammed the next day with like a New York Times or Wall Street Journal op-ed of like a really simple counter argument to what they were rolling out that they should have thought of. And so whenever they set out to do complex decision making, they would always assign somebody to argue, here's the best idea, here's the second best idea, here's the third best idea. And you come to this meeting, and whatever your personal opinions are, you have to argue as adamantly as you possibly can for that thing, because you need to give the best version of every argument in order to make an informed decision. And you know what? If that Wall Street Journal article op-ed comes out and says, wow, the president's office made a really dumb decision, at least if we were challenged on it, we'd be prepared. We're prepared. And I always thought that was interesting, because geothermal, one of the things that we struggle with is it is an incredibly complex systems problem. And a lot of times you have constraints from financing or permitting, or even, very often in our world, you're talking about your reservoir engineers and geoscience teams that always want to collect the maximum amount of data and do the maximum amount of science possible. And then you've got your drilling team that's trying to make sure that you're not overcomplicating the system. And then you got your finance team that's like, well, let's not spend that much money. And what's fascinating is to set up a structure where everybody can argue about that. And I think that's a really useful lesson. And the point of it, though, the lesson was that as soon as you make a decision, you leave the room and you never talk about who said what in terms of 2 months have gone by and, turns out you were wrong. You don't do that. You make a decision as a group, you fight for it adamantly, but once you make the decision, it's a group decision and you move forward. And it's really the only way to make informed decisions in a complex operating.
President Bush was talking about you make the role of the leader is to make decisions, especially if it's complex. If the team can't figure it out on their own, then someone has to make a choice. But then everyone needs to be on board, and you can't go around and spend the next few months double guessing the decision. You need to move into execution. If you go to the Bush Library at SMU, in fact, they've got an exhibit called Decision Points, where you can make your own decisions about things, which is interesting. President Clinton talked a lot about how to sell ideas. We were having to sell ideas to raise money, to get things going, to recruit people. So that's a big part of it. One thing I'll say also is George H.W. Bush, the older one, when we went, he was still alive when we went there, so we got to meet with him and Barbara Bush. He spent a lot of time talking about bipartisan coalitions. And George H.W. Bush was very bipartisan, had more legislation than any other president in the last 100 years other than OBJ. OBJ had 6 years and Bush had 4 years. That might be the difference, but did it in a bipartisan way, things like Clean Air Act amendments and American Disabilities Act, a variety of things. And now you're in this situation where you've got public-private partnerships going on, you got federal policy, you got state policy. Can you talk about sort of coalitions and the relevance of policy at the local, state, and federal level, how that shows up for what you're doing?
Yeah, absolutely. So First, on the topic of bipartisanship, we often talk about geothermal as being a uniquely bipartisan energy resource. And the unfortunate reason for that a few years ago is it was uniquely bipartisan in the sense that both parties didn't know what it was. And
they both ignored it for everything. Yeah.
And the challenge I think we have as an industry now is finally more people are paying attention to geothermal. And the key is, can we maintain that bipartisan mandate as we move this energy resource out of the shadows and into the limelight? And it's not easy because obviously it's a very divisive world. But I was really excited. We did a big groundbreaking ceremony for the exploration and appraisal phase of our next large project in Southwest Utah. We call it Project Cape. It's directly adjacent to the Utah Forge project, where the Department of Energy has put a significant amount of financial resources to unlock a lot of new drilling and new science and new techniques. That to date, the budget there is about $220 million. They've drilled 6 wells in a deep hard rock environment, done all kinds of sort of drilling testing there. There's probably people in the room who tested their equipment out there. It's become a really great test bed. And in terms of public-private partnership, we looked at the drilling results that they had at that site and got really excited about the opportunity to bring forward commercial development of enhanced geothermal systems. So it's somewhat funny. You can literally see the Forge well pad from our well pad. And, that was something that there's no way we could be doing that project as quickly as we could had the Department of Energy not stepped in and done a lot of de-risking of that resource and trialed a bunch of drilling technologies that's allowed us to move a lot more quickly. But so public-private partnership, yes, it's very key to getting any technology to market. But the fun thing from a bipartisan standpoint, at that groundbreaking, we had Governor Spencer Cox from Utah there, who's a massive geothermal champion. So really exciting to have that level of enthusiasm at the state leadership. And he got up and spoke after a couple of our speakers, and then after the local county official, and then importantly after a Biden administration official, who of course stood up.
Republican Spencer Cox and Democratic administration working together, right?
And of course, this was a Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Interior, a Biden appointee, and she got up and went down the normal talking points about, we're here for the climate. This is the result of the Inflation Reduction Act and Joe Biden's economy, and really emphasize that. And I was sitting there being really a little bit nervous about how this could turn out. And then Governor Cox got up there and he started talking about this. And I didn't realize this fact until we got this. This is Beaver County, Utah. And Governor Cox shared this fact that it was the most pro-Trump county in America in the 2020 election. I think it was over 88% voted for Trump, and it was not 10% voting for Biden. It was other parties. And then he went on to talk about how excited he was to have somebody from the Biden administration there, because geothermal is something that, he emphasized Republicans care about the environment. Republicans care about climate. We just want to make sure that the solutions are sensible. And there was this shared collaboration and he emphasized how great geothermal was because it was reliable, because it had low land use footprint, because it could provide that backbone of the grid that's needed. And the Biden administration, Laura Daniel Davis from the Interior Department, stood up and applauded. And I think it was really exciting to see. And in a very polarized world, geothermal, if we navigate this the correct way, we can go from the shadows to the limelight and still be a bipartisan resource. We just have to make sure we're talking about the right attributes to the right audience. It relies on uniquely American drilling technology innovation. It's a fuel resource, energy resource that doesn't require us to rely on imports, and it's carbon free. I mean, there's not a lot to dislike here. We just need to get that message out there more and try to maintain that bipartisan support as we do.
And as a former regulator of a utility, utilities like things they can control. A power plant you could turn off and on and ramp up and down is very desirable. So I think we're probably to wrap up. I want to ask you one more question about the tension in the world, the universal tension between labor and capital. And right now you are trying to attract labor and you are trying to attract capital. And there's a lot of private capital now for geothermal available that wasn't available, say 10 years ago. So the markets have changed on the labor side. Capital, what's it like right now? You're trying to attract money and people. What are some of the things you're doing? What kind of reaction or response are you getting?
Yeah, it's a good question. Labor's stretched, but I don't think it's as difficult as it was a year ago. I think a year ago it was very difficult for suppliers to stay staffed up. It was difficult for us to hire. It was difficult for anybody to hire. It was a very stretched job market, and that settled down a little bit. And I think that's leading to sort of a better outcome. There is more funding available for geothermal than there was before, but even that has taken a dip since last year. So it's almost interesting. We can hire people, and there's more attention and focus now on the people front and supplier interest, but the amount of capital, it's up overall, but definitely down from last year in terms of raising new funding for new technology startups. So things kind of ebb and flow. I think you've got to have a way to smooth it over. I think on the talent piece, geothermal sits in a really interesting spot, though, because especially as you think about the younger generation, climate change is top of mind. You can look at a poll of how important is climate change to you, and it's almost a linear, actually a linear decrease by age. And
Totally believe that. Yes, as someone who teaches
yeah,
people who are 25 and younger, I would say there's a big generational divide for sure.
And so I think it's something, and I think this is something that's great to, as we think about, particularly me coming from the oil and gas community, I'm sure there are a lot of people here in the oil and gas community. Our future as an industry and our ability to navigate this energy transition does come down to the ability to continue to attract the best and the brightest talent into the industry. And when you go, I mean, what maybe from your perspective as a professor at the University of Texas that has one of the best petroleum engineering programs in the world, how does interest in oil and gas stand now compared to when you started as a professor?
So my colleagues up here from petroleum engineering, but I think that maybe I can say things he can't say. I don't even know what he thinks, but what you're seeing is a lot of petroleum engineering programs are renaming themselves. And UT is Petroleum and Geosystems Engineering. I wouldn't be surprised if it has a different name a decade from now. There's a lot of interest in what goes on below the surface. Students are very interested to think that our subsurface expertise is going to be relevant in the future for geothermal, for carbon sequestration, plus oil and gas, everything else, minerals extraction, you name it. So I think the skill set was relevant for as far as the eye can see. The branding might change.
Yeah.
I was just at a meeting with oil and gas before this. I'm on their ESG advisory council. They're like, we don't say DEI anymore. We say diversity. DEI is diversity, equity, and inclusion. They say, we're going to do the same thing we always did. We should call it something different. So there might be some of that happening in academia as well, where people use a different word, but it's actually the same kind of expertise, the same skill sets. But I think students are drawn to those skill sets. In fact, petroleum engineering at UT now has a sustainability minor. It's a different track that's very popular. So I think the students are there, but they're worried about the label to some degree.
I think that's true, but it is interesting how much, especially that student pull is, and I think it's a interesting opportunity, whether you're coming at this from the geothermal side or the oil and gas side, to understand that that's where the students want to go now. You know, that's where the talent wants to go, and incorporating something about geothermal. It is the most smooth path on skills transfer from oil and gas to a clean energy resource, and I think it's vital for the industry to stay competitive.
Yeah, very harmonious from a labor justice perspective, right? Can you, so are we out of time, or can I ask him to spend 1 minute on capital?
1 minute on capital.
You said the money change a little bit, it's different, but also there's bipartisan support now. There's some federal support. There's the utilities certainly want it.
Yeah.
So I feel like you've had big announcements as a company recently around potential customers and stuff. So it feels like a different world now than a decade ago.
It's definitely a different world, and I don't want to be a Debbie Downer. It's interesting. You think about capital is down from last year, but last year was up 1,000% from 4 years ago.
Yeah.
So we're still in a much better situation, and what we're seeing is there's still more and more commitments coming into climate and clean energy focused funds, and they're going to end up needing to deploy that money eventually. So I think you're starting to see the fundraising market improve. I think there's going to be more opportunities for geothermal. We've just got to be louder about it because, whether you're talking about the Department of Energy and government funding, if you look at, you mentioned that the hydrogen announcements are going to be coming out relatively soon. Those are sites that are funded to the tune of billions of dollars each from federal support. Meanwhile, geothermal, we're still talking about single-digit millions of funding. Yeah. And so I think that's something that the capital is there, the public funding is there. We've got to do a better job of claiming our seat at the table, though, and whether it's with the private investors or the government, talking to people about how transformative geothermal could be, because it's not like we need more funding in the space. We just need more of the people who are allocating capital and allocating grant funding to realize that geothermal is the future. And the next time we pass through a thing about doing hubs for stuff, I think we should be talking about geothermal.
Geothermal hub, why not?
Yeah. A multi-billion-dollar hub.
Yeah, we got just, there's hydrogen hubs we announced probably on Hydrogen Day, which is October 8th or 1008, because that's the mass of hydrogen 1.008. And then carbon hubs were announced a while ago. In the future, there could be geothermal hubs or other things, which is great. But I think we have to stop there. Thank you very much, and please join me in thanking Tim Latimer from Fervo. Great.